We're back live tonight here on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. Academic and businesswoman Dr. Mamphela Ramphele has penned an article that reflects on the social construction of race in light of the challenges that plague South Africa. She highlights how such social constructions divide societies and retrace the path of coloniality and colonialism. The co-founder of ReimagineSA draws attention to reimagining beyond racial divides. Dr. Mamphela Ramphele joins us now for more on that article and the thinking around it. Good to have you. Thank you very much for your time tonight on In Focus. If we look at the current situation in South Africa, be it you turn one way, we are unable to keep children in incubators, we keep them in cardboard boxes. You look the other way, we have complicated international relations around our relationship with Russia, but even more pressing as we speak, the challenge of energy. We are unable to keep our lights on. It's affecting everything, the rent, the cost of living, and so on and so forth. One citizen says the current government seems to be in a situation there they are overwhelmed and they can't creatively navigate us out of this situation. How do you remain optimistic in that kind of environment?
As I said in the article, we have been here before, and thank you for having me. We must not forget that the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s were very dark years in South Africa. And people in the 60s were petrified of even opening their mouths. But what changed the situation in the 60s are young people, my generation then students, who decided to ask a very simple question. How is it possible that a small minority of foreigners can come into our country and literally paralyze us into submission? And today, the same question pertains. How can we be still using the categories that divided South Africa so that it could be conquered and ruled by outsiders in 2023, when we are the majority? So what happened in the late 60s was an awakening within us as young people that we have to liberate ourselves first from the sense of being second best, non-whites, non-Europeans, and define ourselves very proudly as black and proud and Africans who own this country.
Right.
And once that happened, we were unstoppable. We mobilized other university students. We mobilized high school students. We mobilized our parents, the faith community, trade unions. Because when that fire of liberation burns, it cannot be extinguished.
Yeah.
And so you see this 75-year-old sitting here at 9:30 because of that, because we are not yet free.
Yeah.
The difficulty we created for ourselves in 1994 was to behave like we are still a subordinated country.
Yeah.
We are, if our government in 1994 adopted policies that did the right thing for all the citizens, the majority of those people who would have benefited would have been black like you and me, and would have been women because they are the majority, would have been young people because also they are the majority.
Yeah.
But instead, the government of the ANC over the last 30 years has chosen the party over the country. And so the reason there are cardboard boxes instead of courts is because money is being stolen from hospitals. The reason we are in this dark is because Eskom has been stolen to its knees. The reason our people are dying of cholera. I mean, I was a young medical doctor when we in the apartheid years, made sure, with the help of enlightened people in the healthcare and the teaching professions, to make sure that we do away with cholera. That was in the 80s.
Yeah.
Cholera in 2023 is an absolute damnation of what this government has failed to do. The people of Hammanskraal have been without water for more than 2 decades. Clean water, that is. And it's not because this country is drought-stricken. Yes, we have scarcity of water, but the most important thing is that this government, over the last 30 years, has not invested in infrastructure, whether it's water, sanitation, roads, even simple basic things like schools that work with toilets that don't kill our children.
Yeah.
So we have a problem.
Mama, are you saying that the reason why we have failed to promote social equity and maybe even economic equity is not so much on the fact that we've had bad policies and maybe people even ignoring those policies instead of implementing them, but you're saying we could locate it at one, poor governance, and maybe, to take it further, bad governance in general, at least in the last 30 years?
It's not maybe. It is bad governance. We started well in 1994. We made some mistakes, the arms deal and all of those things. But over the last 20-odd years, we have not just made mistakes, or the government has not just made mistakes. It's made deliberate decisions to enrich themselves and a few, and to finance the ANC from the public purse, from my and your taxes. And when you do that, you are conflicted as a public servant. The good public servants who were there either were let go, or they left, or some of them, like Babita
Diakoran.
Yes, they were killed.
Yes.
For trying to stop this. But what makes me hopeful is the rise of young people. It's not just the young people who now are forming this incredibly important coalition for democracy, but it is young people who are doing interesting things in schools, in agriculture, in helping babies who have been abandoned. So there is a spirit afoot, which reminds me very much of the spirit that possessed us in the late 60s and reignited a moribund liberation struggle, which led to the freedom we are enjoying today. We were not liberated by people who came from outside. Well, we liberated ourselves. And when I say we liberated, I mean, as Mandela said, no single party or organization should claim sole authorship of this freedom. But the ANC has wrapped itself with the iconic figures of Mandela, Tambo, and claim that they liberated us. They didn't.
How do you sustain, though, that energy of youth, Mama? If, for example, you've got a young Minister of Justice and Correctional Development, his own report says part of your problem that you're dealing with is that what makes up your department is 79% of the people, for example, who work in the courts are old. They are over retirement age, and pretty soon they're going to be out of the system. And his answer to that is, well, there's an upside to that. At least we've got a wealth of experience there, so we should be keeping those people there. And what happens then to these young people who've got creativity and who've got energy, who want to get into the system where clearly they're not going to be able to get in there right now?
The minister is being disingenuous. It's not because those people have got experience that they're kept there. They're kept there because they are loyal members of the party. And he, as a young person, is failing to rise to the challenge of leadership. He has the capacity, but he, like many others, including increasingly people are believing, our president is also hamstrung by a party which does not tolerate anything that threatens its survival. But guess what? We have seen that the more a regime that fails to govern, that fails to meet the needs of ordinary people, the more they try to stay in power, the quicker they will tumble. Because what is happening in this country is totally unacceptable, even to the most forgiving and most generous person. You cannot accept that 81% of grade 4 kids cannot read with meaning in a country which spends more money than any African country. And yet, our education, despite Zimbabwe's problems, is inferior to Zimbabwe, it's inferior to Malawi, it's inferior to Swaziland.
The President signed the Employment Equity Amendment Bill of 2020 into law, the act which says it empowers the Department of Labour to set new transformation targets for industries, including regional ones. And the DA is saying that all South Africans should reject this Employment Equity Act. Now, you would know, and I'm sure you would have heard, that the political elite who, for example, benefited from policies like BEE, Black Economic Empowerment, failed once they were into those positions to transform those particular sectors that they were called upon to transform. And this is part of the challenge of why, for example, in top management in companies, the employment figures are still skewed towards the white people in the country more than the black people. Hence, we need something like an Employment Equity Amendment Bill. What do you say to that?
You know, it's like we have failed to implement employment equity for the last 30 years, so let's do some more. That's called madness. We are the only country on this continent that uses racial categories. And we are the worst performing relative to our resources. That should get us to ask the question, what are we doing wrong? What are we doing wrong is that we have lost sight of the importance of a constitutional democracy where every citizen is important. The DA can say what it wants to say. They are not necessarily helping the case, particularly some in that leadership, because it is true that racism is with us. My point is simple. When you've got such an overwhelming majority of black people and a lot of people who will not be categorized as black, who are goodwilling, they've got goodwill, they want the country to progress. Why pay attention to a category which divides instead of paying attention to lifting all boats? Because then the racists will become more and more irrelevant as a minority of a minority, which they are. But because our government's intention is not to correct the injustices of the past, is to take advantage of those categories so that they can have even the ANC as a BEE partner with ESCOM. That's why we are where we are.
You are saying, and one would ask, what do you mean by this? You're saying poor people are not the poor. They are human beings. They're saying we must do away with this language, with this lexicon of calling poor people the poor, but begin to call them human beings.
We are in a country where 60% of people in this country could be called poor. And the point of going back to what really matters, which is our humanity, is that those people are poor not because this country is poor. They are poor because they are not being treated with the dignity, with the fairness, with the compassion that Ubuntu enjoins us to treat everybody. So it is a great tragedy that a black government presides over the continuing impoverishment of the majority of people who are black people. And so to try and now come up with a stricter employment equity, in aid of what? We've got 70% of young people in the ages, or employment amongst the young people in the ages of 15 to 25 is 70%. Those young people are exactly the creative energy and the people who should be leading this country. But they are there because they've been failed by the education system. So it doesn't matter how strict your employment equity targets are. You are not graduating the kind of people who will not be employed because of the targets, but because they are absolutely brilliant. They are absolutely energetic. They are self-confident. They don't need the crutches of BEE. What they need is high-quality education and a supportive environment and a government that does its job in terms of creating the conditions for everyone to be a contributor to this country thriving.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yeah.
This is what keeps me going, is the knowledge that we can do it. And when I read and listen to the newspaper, I listen to the TV, and I hear these young voices.
Yeah.
I say, yes, this is what is going to free this country from this second round of oppressors who claim to be our liberators.
You mentioned already that the reason why children are in cardboard boxes instead of incubators, while we are in the dark, instead of having sufficient energy, and why people are dying of cholera, part of it is the stealing of billions and billions of rent. Something very peculiar. You've got a segment of society that goes to parliament. They ask them a simple question. Give us the names of the politicians who are said to be benefiting from ESCOM. Up until today, nobody wants to answer us that question. From the CEO to the hawks, to the police minister, to the police commissioner, to the intelligence advisor, nobody wants to point at who is behind this. There are known criminals that seemingly society is not prepared to finger. Do you think we will ever get to a point where we are actively recovering these stolen trillions of money that is gone?
Absolutely. I mean, when de Kock was killing people, he didn't think that he'll ever be revealed. And people knew that this was happening in the same way that people know today. And it's not true that those people have not been named. Those people were named by directors to Pravin Gordhan and to Mfumati, who must have reported to the president unless they are people who are not following the rules of government. So it is not true that those are not known. They are known. It is that they are being protected. They are protected by a government that seems to not have the courage to follow through with its promise to clean up the mess which was created by none other than the ANC themselves.
Have we learned anything from history?
Well, yes. We have learned that it is dangerous not to learn from history. And many people in this country have learned the right lessons from history. But what we now are also seeing in these young people who are standing up and claiming their voices is that they have learned from history. They actually directly quote the events of the 70s and the 80s. And of course, we have seen with Fees Must Fall. So young people have learned from history. They have learned even beyond here. They they talk about Sankara and his encouragement of young people to rise to the challenge of their generations. So I'm very, very hopeful and very confident because we shall overcome.
Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight here on In Focus. That is the co-founder of Reimagine South Africa, an academic as well as a businesswoman. Her thoughts on what needs to happen now as far as turning things around, as far as the fate of this country is concerned.